Welcome to my channel once again. My name is Msimen Alex, and basically today we want to basically talk about another important area in contract law one, actually contract law two, which is discharge of a contract, and particularly we want to look at discharge of a contract by agreement. How is the contract discharged by agreement? And of course, before we move on, I want first to encourage you to subscribe. You press the button below and subscribe to this channel for purposes of always being following and getting notified of different tutorial sessions that come on this channel. Let's now delve into our today's topic. But even before, we need to first understand the root of contract by defining a contract. And a contract is defined under Section 9, subsection 1 of Contracts Act, which defines a contract as an agreement made with free consent of the parties with capacity to contract with an intention to create regulations with the lawful object for a lawful consideration, and of course with an intention to create regulations. That is very important. Please note that the contract can be made orally also can be made in writing, and it can also be made either partially in writing and partially in writing in the orally, and that is important for you, for us, for everyone to understand. So, how is a contract discharged by agreement? But of course, discharge of a contract is basically a way how a contract is brought to an end. Basically, that is what discharge of a contract is, a way how a contract is brought to an end. So, a contract can be brought to an end in several ways, and one being discharged by agreement. Another one can be discharged by performance. Another one can be discharged by frustration. Another one can be discharged by breach. But basically, today we want to focus on discharge by agreement. What is discharge by agreement? And discharge by agreement is basically a situation where parties come together and agree to have the contract set aside, to have the contractual obligations released, parties to be relieved and set free. Okay, that is what it means by discharge by agreement. And of course, it is for purposes of understanding it very much, you can also appreciate Section 50 of Contracts Act, which basically provides for different ways of discharging by agreement, which involve number one being novation, being rescission, and another one being alteration of the contract. Those are the three ways where a contract is discharged by agreement. Look at Section 50, and it basically provides that where parties to a contract agree to substitute to make a substitution of the original contract and the new contract, or to rescind or alter the original contract, and the original contract need not to be performed. It means parties have been discharged from the obligation of the earlier or original contract. Look at Section 50 of Contracts Act. It provides for discharge of a contract by agreement. But of course, it is also important to read under the book of Chiromba, Trinomjin Chiromba, which is called Principles of Contract Law in Uganda. It also discusses the same, particularly at page 169. Look at that book. It provides the onset, it gives the basics of how discharge of a contract by agreement is basically handled. Let's now delve into, of course, there is a principle that we need to understand as we move on, and it is basically in Latin. It is called condem modo quo orita, condem modo dissolvita, condem modo quo orita, condem modo quo modo dissolvita, which basically means that What is joined by agreement can be separated by agreement. Condem modo co orita, condem modo dissolvita. What is created by agreement can be dissolved by agreement or can be separated by agreement. That is a principle, that is a Latin maxim that governs discharge by agreement. That is a very, very important. And it is now important for us to know what amounts to novation. Novation of a contract basically means replacing a contract by another contract. For example, I had entered into a contract with you for the sale of Mercedes Benz. Then we later agree to substitute uh, that contract with another contract. For example, we now shift from Mercedes Benz, then we go to maybe land, but the parties remain the same. I remain me and you, but now we shift a contract to another contract from the sale of a car to the sale of land. That is what we call innovation. It is very, very important for us to understand it. Innovation, parties agree to change the contract, to shift from the sale of a laptop to the sale of, let's say, a motorcycle or a bicycle or a car. That is what we call innovation. So here, basically, parties, the contract changes, but parties remain the same. That is very, very important. The good example is where A is indebted to B, and B is also indebted to C. But by mutual agreement, B's debt to C and the B's loan to A are cancelled, and of course B accepts to pay A, like that. That is what it means by innovation. What was the contract? For example, I was supposed to give Mr. James a car, but of course James also wanted to give a certain car to Peter. So we agree that I give that contract, that car to Peter instead of James. That is what it means. Okay. Then of course we can now proceed and look at another item, what is called alteration. What is alteration? And alteration basically means that parties agree to alter the terms of a contract. Okay? Parties agree to alter the terms of a contract. Parties remain, but uh, terms of a contract change. But in innovation, it is possible parties to change. Instead of me paying James, now I pay Peter, because the same money that was going to James can also go to Peter, because the other was also indebted to the other. Okay, so but in the alteration, parties do not change. That's the difference. The difference between innovation and alteration is that innovation, parties change, but in alteration, it is only the terms that can change. Okay, that is important for us to understand. I repeat, the difference between innovation and alteration is that in alteration, it is only terms that change. But in innovation, parties change. They can also change terms, but usually it is parties that change. Okay, that is very, very, very important. So now it is important that we look at rescission. Even rescission is also governed by by Section 50 of Contracts Act. All these the two previous items are also governed by Section 50 of Contracts Act. And basically, let's now look at rescission. Rescission basically means that parties have agreed to cancel the contract. Parties have agreed to cancel the contract. What else do you need? We no longer have a contract. And the original contract, as stipulated by Section 50, The original contract need not to be performed when parties have agreed to rescind it. Okay, that is important for us to keep understanding and appreciating it. Kindly look at section 50. It provides that where parties agree to rescind the contract or to rescind the original contract, or where parties agree to alter the terms of a contract, or where parties agree to replace, that is innovation, to replace the contract, then the original contract need not to be performed. Look at uh, Ben Chiromba's book, particularly at page 169. It provides for the same. Look at Contracts Act, as I mentioned. Always take into account of the definitions of a contract, definition of discharge of a contract. As we mentioned, discharge of a contract is basically a situation where parties agree, where the modes of bringing a contract to an end. And there are several ways. One being breach, two being agreement, and now one being uh, performance and also frustration. We have videos on those modes of termination or modes of discharging a contract. Kindly check out and get to understand them. Otherwise, I want to thank you so much for watching. I want to encourage you to follow. I want to encourage you to subscribe. I want to encourage you to leave a comment. I want to encourage you to like. Always comment so that you get to know the clarification in case you need clarification, in case you want anything regarding the law. We are always available to provide. We are at your service. Kindly subscribe. Thank you.